Hello and welcome back to the studio. As you can see, I've got a canvas already set up to go, 12 by 16. But what am I painting this week? Well, here's a little bit of a backstory. Some time ago, I painted this little scene and it was a real hit. People like that sort of old Americana, old cars, desert scenes, and it really struck a note with you. So I thought, it's been a while since I did that. And just so happens, a while back I was looking on a Facebook group and I saw one of you, my lovely subscribers, had published a photograph of an image that I thought, wow, isn't that striking? And I thought, I have to try and paint this for you. Now, whenever I'm faced with the prospect of doing something new, the first question I always ask myself is, how would Bob do this? And if he's ever done something like this? And the next thing I have to always do is go and consult my oracle, which is Terry, and say, did Bob ever do anything like this? And she said, And she goes away, and 2 minutes later she is back with this book. And this is the Bob Ross Joy Painting number 29. And she pulls out that photograph, light at the summit. She said, that's the sort of background you're looking for, different colours, but that's the technique. And I said, yeah, what about the cabin? She goes, She said, let me have a quick flip through here. And sure enough, quicker than I can find it, she pulled out a cabin painting. A few moments later, she pulls out this painting from the same series, and this one, Countryside Barn. So she said, we've got 2 of the 3 elements already sorted out, just out of car. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be trying to use Bob's technique to paint this scene on a canvas using one of Bob's techniques for the background and one of Bob's cabins. And I'll just do some tracing work to make life easier. So let's get started. So let's look and see how I've got my painting all arranged. Now, the first thing I did is I took a canvas and I gave it a coat of buff titanium. The original photograph I was sent has got a very much a sandy brown tones for the background, very muted sort of palette, and obviously the car stands out because that's sort of nice turquoisey blue colour, and that's a nice little trick because it really makes that the focal point. So everything is on sort of tones of browns and golds and things. So starting off with this sort of biscuit coloured background is really quite a nice start, which means we're sort of halfway there with our colours. And in case you didn't know, the colour I was using is called Buff Titanium White, and this is an acrylic. If you don't have this, you can get some white acrylic or white gesso and add a little tiny drop of yellow ochre into it, and maybe just a smidge of red just to warm it up if you wish. But you can make a very similar biscuit brown colour to this, but it doesn't have to be exact, but just keep it on the light side. I cropped the photograph a little bit. Fido here took a break. I threw him a stick and he ran off. So Fido's not in the picture, and I cropped it so that you see all of the detail is in this corner of my painting, and this piece of my painting is completely open, and this is a negative space. In other words, there isn't really much to draw your eye, but it forces you to look to this corner. And this is a neat little trick sometimes of positioning all the heavy attention getting stuff in one side and not too much else anywhere else, apart from that little glow of light, of course. So I made this up and I've printed it out onto 2 A4 sheets which I've taped together. So what I'll do is I'll do this for you and I'll put it onto my Pixabay page. So that if you want to, you can print this off and then you can do your own version of this painting. As I said, I'm going to be using some of Bob's techniques to do this, and I'm going to change the design a little bit because I don't want it to be an exact copy of someone else's photograph. And to get this image onto the canvas, now I just printed it on the back of some scrap paper from my previous painting, and the thing I'm going to use to transfer the image is some of this, and this is graphite paper. It's very old and I've used it loads, but it still works perfectly well. And if you do much in the way of this sort of work, then some graphite paper is essential. I think it's probably one of those little supplies that you should always have knocking around. Now this is way easier to do if it's laying on a table, so I'm just literally going to try and do a little bit of the demonstration here for you. I want to just change the shape of this hillside a little bit, and of course I'm going to use a Bob Ross biro to do this. What other thing would you use? So I'm thinking about these sort of two nice hills here. One sort of hillside in the background going that way, and maybe a nice hill going that way. And there we go. So we can sort of do a couple of nice little hills in the background. And then this is all going to be fairly sort of low in detail. I'm going to put in a few nice little bushes and the like in here. And then the roadway coming through here. And as I say, you're just literally looking for just a small amount of information here. And I'm going to just drop in the shape of my barn. Now I am going to distress my barn a little more. This looks a little bit too neat and tidy, but I'm just looking for the shape at this stage. That's all I'm looking for is the shape of the roof, the shape of that, the eaves and the sidewall. Okay, so that's all we really need. The rest of this you can add or leave out as you wish. Okay, so that's really it. We're keeping the detail to a minimum. Now here's a top tip for you. Once you've been doing this for a few moments, lift it up and make sure something's actually going onto your canvas, because if you put this on the wrong way around, well, you know the end result. It won't be what you want it to be. And the final thing to do is the car. And again, I'm going to take my time with this, and I'm going to trace that outline onto the canvas. As I say, this is way easier if it's laying flat, which is what I'm going to do. But as you can see, what I really want to do is position things, and then I'm going to use some acrylic for my backgrounds to speed up the process. So come back in a second when this is all finished. So here's my prepared canvas with my outline on it. And I pointed out to you that I didn't put in all the little details, not every little bush and stick and twig. I just wanted the basic layout. The rest of it I'll paint as I go along. Now let's have a look at the brushes I'm going to use, and it's quite a motley selection, I have to say. When I'm using acrylic paint, I tend to use either synthetic brushes, which don't mind being in water, or old bristle brushes, ones that I really haven't got much of a sort of attachment to in terms of what they cost to make or to buy, and they are pretty well worn, and these can go in water and be absolutely fine. But I do suggest not using your Bob Ross brushes for this. The Bob Ross landscape brushes, especially the 1" and 2" brushes, they just don't like going in water. So use synthetic brushes or some cheap and cheerful brushes. They're absolutely perfect. Now let's have a look at our colours. As I mentioned, this is going to be predominantly sepias and browns, and so I've got a burnt umber, which is nice and dark, and I've got a burnt sienna, which is sort of a mid-brown colour. Also got some yellow ochre and some cad orange, but you use whatever colours you have to hand. Now the other colours I've got to hand are some black and white acrylic. I might need a little touch of white in the headlights, maybe a little touch to darken some of my colours, but predominantly I want to stay in those middle tones, and I've put a little bit of each of those colours on my regular plastic plate. So I'm going to stick mainly with these tones and not go too much to the extremes. So let's have a look at our reference picture. You see, I've printed it up in colour for us, and I'll probably bring it up in the corner so you've got a bigger image up there to look at. But essentially what I want to do is I want to work on the background hills first, and try and maybe work on some of the distant sky. This pink blush colour through here, I'm going to be doing that with oil paint. And how dark do I want to go across the top of the canvas? Well, we'll see. I might only want just a corner darkened off. I'll do that as I see fit. Okay, let's get cracking now. And I'm going to start off with one of my big flat brushes, and I'm going to go into the darker of the browns. And as I say, if you've got no acrylics and you want to do this entire painting in oil, that's absolutely fine. But you just have to allow a little bit more drying time between layers with acrylics, because obviously there's a time crunch. I got to get this done for a nice class on Wednesday. Sorry, a class on Sunday. means I've got to get on with this a little bit quicker. Now all I'm doing is I just want to create some texture here. Remember these hills are a long way away. I don't want any great detail on them. I just want a bit of what I call something and nothing. I just want there to be a sort of a nice sort of mottled effect in the background. Could be thousands of little hills and bushes and trees and things back there. I just don't need to see the detail. Now, here's an interesting something. See how this all converges on the corner of my building here? This is a little bit of a tangle, isn't it? All of these things have all arrived almost at this point. And I did it by accident. My subconscious brain took over when I was just scratching this all on here, and I just drew those lines and they all ended up ending up at one spot. So I'm going to make sure that that doesn't happen. That way it's not going to crowd the corner of my roof. Again, I'm just going to go for a soft top edge here. Just using the bristles of the brush here just to add that little bit of soft texture. And we are going to bring some sunlight over the top of this hill as well. Now I'm going to bring in this line through here, and I want to be able to see the line of this hill. So if I carry on with that colour as is, it's not going to show up. So what I'm going to do is use that colour, maybe a little yellow ochre with it. Just add a slightly lighter brown colour. I'm going to steer away from this tone for the minute. Let's give that a little try. And as you see, there's a nice little change of colour there. When we pull the sunlight over the top of that little hillside, it'll change again. And it's okay to leave a little bit of unpainted canvas through there. Remember, this is going to be covered with lots of vegetation and foliage and all sorts of stuff, so I don't want this to be too sort of flat and smooth. I want this to have lots of little highs and low spots in it. Now, as I say, once you start moving into your painting, you start getting on with it, keep reminding of yourself, where is the focus? Is it really essential that every tiny little bit of this hillside be painted in perfect detail? Is that really where you want to put a lot of kind of hard work and effort? Or do you think you'd be better off spending your time painting a little more effort in the car and into the building? Because just getting this initial stage done, just blocking in, getting in some of this initial foliage, you can sort of get kind of locked into it, and where you can't sort of see past this bit and you almost can't stop painting it. So I tend to try and get this part of my painting just done. I just want to get it blocked in. I want a little bit of texture. I want a little bit of paint. I just want to kind of fill this in. And I made reference to this on the last little painting that I did, which is where I did all my background lovely and soft and smooth, and then I put in a really dark foreground, and it was so kind of like took my eye so strongly, and it just goes to prove that sometimes all the time I could have spent playing around with that background and it all been a little bit too pale, a little bit too sort of wishy-washy, and suddenly you put in the foreground and you realised all that effort from the background was worthless. You could have got on with it a lot faster. So at this stage, all I'm doing is I'm just playing at blocking in my painting. I'm going to be a little bit careful around the roof of the car. And as I say, it's just about blocking in. It's a fair bit darker, isn't it? So again, we're working forward in layers. I'll come back and add some more detail and some more highlight to these as and when. Right, I'm going to do a little bit of time lapse through here, work on this left side of my painting down to the road, and put in some little bushes and details over here on the right. So a nice little quick step for you. So for this stage of my painting, I've probably taken no more than maybe 5 or 10 minutes just to block in these large areas. Now the colour's not quite right. I need some darker shadowy areas in here, and for that I could use black. I could just take some black acrylic and mix that in with some of my browns and hope for the best, but I'm tempted not to try and do that. I actually want to get a more of a sort of grey tone, and for that I'm actually going to use some ultramarine blue, and I'm going to mix that with some of my browns. Let's try that combination and see what I get. Maybe a small round brush, something like that, because I just want to add it into a few spots. So ultramarine blue and a little bit of brown, put some of that brown colour there beside it, and pull the two into each other and see what we get. You might be quite surprised. We get quite a nice blue-grey colour. How about that? Blue-grey, perfect for a nice shadow colour. So there we go. Avoid using black if you can, and make a nice grey. Now let's have a quick look at my reference picture. I want to just add in, because my hills are a little bit different to the shape of this one here, but I just want to add a little bit more shadow line over into here. So you see how that looks a little bit darker blue-grey. It's rather nice. And I might bring a little bit more of that down into this area here too. I can use that little brush just to sneaky up on the roof of my building. Now, when we also look here, we've got these lovely deep shadows here and some nice shadows under these bushes and some shadows coming across the ground as well. And that's what I'm going to work on next. Just going back in here and reinforcing some of these shadows. I keep my reference picture quite close to hand so I know where I'm working. And if you're ever losing position, look where something fixed on the painting is, like this fender, this front wheel arch here. And you see just to the side of it, there's a lovely patch of dark. So there's that wheel arch. So we know that we have got some strong dark shadows in here. So continuously look back at your reference picture. If you're ever unsure, if you think you've lost position, look back at this, measure things from the distance from the car, and you won't be far wrong. And the nice thing is that, as I say, if it's not exactly in the right place, well, who's going to know? But I'm going to come back and spend a few more minutes adding in some of these dark grey shadow tones, especially this lovely dark one here that cuts that corner off. So here's my painting after I've started to put in some of those grey tones, and I think you can see they really kind of add that nice sort of sense of depth of colour to my painting. Now, I know that the reference photograph here is actually a composite. It was never taken in that place. This car I found in numerous places all over the internet, and this building here was never up against that hillside. So you have to play things very carefully. For instance, if you notice this lovely deep shadow here from these little bushes here coming across the ground, I think that looks quite realistic. But the car, look at the shadow it's casting. There's hardly anything there. So I've had to deepen up my shadow a little bit. And this building here, it does look a little bit as though it's been glued on. So again, I'm sort of taking my time with it, and I'll soften up some of these edges, and I may knock out a few more extra boards. I don't want this to be an exact copy. Bear in mind, this is a standard sort of cabin that Bob would do, so we don't really have to take too much notice of this. we can do our own thing here. But do pay attention to those Mother Nature things like shadows. So I'm going to come back in here and deepen up some of these shadows and start working on some of the other tones in my painting. For instance, well, I haven't touched this colour here yet. So I'm going to use some of this nice sort of burnt orangey sort of colour with some yellow ochre. And I want this really more for my road here. Now, I don't know if this is the right colour or not. I'm probably going to put just a little touch on here and just have a little look and see what I think. Remember, this is like an old sandy road. I'll put a little bit on, and you'll notice I'm just laying it on with the side of my brush. It's a bit too brown there. Lay it on with the side of the brush and just let the brush sort of run and skip. This paper canvas, which is actually what I'm painting on, has got a little bit of texture to it. And if you just lay your brush on its side and just rub, you can lay down some nice texture. And again, this is really like dry brushing, but using acrylics. And it's a technique I really enjoy doing. You can get a tremendous amount of detail into your painting without having to work too hard at it. And it's something I encourage you to do. And it also really reinforces the idea of not using your nice brushes, because this actually will wear out your brushes pretty darn quick. But you can get some fabulous effects with it, and you can really push in some colour into your painting. So again, I'm just going to be putting in little touches of colour. I'm going to let these colours sort of bump into each other a little bit, and I'll play backwards and forwards a little bit more. But so far, I probably spent maybe an hour and a half maybe on this picture, and already you can start to see it coming together. So here's my little painting so far. Now, I posed a question to you on the YouTube channel: how long do you think it took me to reach this stage in my painting? And I'm delighted that so many of you sort of didn't give me too long to do this much of my painting. There were no guesses of sort of 3 or 4 hours. In fact, many of you actually guessed for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, just about an hour. And the reason why this is important, because it actually took me just a little over an hour to do everything, trace it and blocking in. So why am I making so much of a sort of a point about this? It's to stop you getting bogged down with your paintings. I used to start my paintings with a sort of a clear idea of what I was doing, and I would spend hours just fiddling around and not really kind of getting to grips with my painting. And I would stop my painting sort of maybe after 2 or 3 hours and look back at it and think, what have I been doing all this time? And then I would lose heart, and I would lose momentum with my painting. And it is momentum that we need to carry us through. So I say, don't spend too long doing the backgrounds of your paintings. Do what I did. Block them in quite quickly. Don't worry about total accuracy. Try and get things as right as they can be. And if they're not 100% perfect, well, that's absolutely fine. But I really want to move on now and start working on the barn. And incidentally, I decided not to touch the sky with acrylics. I want a softer look for that, and I'll be doing that bit in oils. So, the barn. And as I say, I'm going to be moving into the oil phase of my painting. For this stage of my painting, I'm going to be using a technique called dry brushing. And I'll explain that in just a moment. And I'm also going to be using this particular brand of paint. This is a Winsor & Newton water mixable oil. After many attempts at trying to use oil paint to do dry brushing, I settled on this brand because it gives me the right blend of sort of oil and sort of dryness. And it's because I don't want a paint that's too overly wet. I can use this to actually create some nice effects with a brush. Speaking of which, here are the brushes I'm going to be using. Now, I've pulled out a couple of different ones here. I want to point out these ones here are new, fairly soft, nice and floppy. But these ones have been well used, and they've got a little bit sort of roughness to them. They're a bit sort of tougher. And it's brushes in this sort of condition that work best, because the technique of dry brushing involves scrubbing paint into the canvas. In fact, you can see there, I've got the residue of some paint from the previous time. And if I lay it on my canvas and really scrub hard, you see, I can slowly build up some colour. That was a happy accident, wasn't it? So the idea is we're going to apply paint very, very thinly and in an almost dry condition, meaning that most of the oil and binders have been leached out of the paint, leaving us just pigment and some of that nice gluiness. So that's what I'm going to be doing. So some of these brushes will be getting a workout for the first time, but most of them are going to be fairly well used. And I suggest you look for these sorts of synthetic brushes which are slightly angled. I think these ones work best, and these ones, well, cheap as chips. Don't use anything too expensive for this because you're going to wear them out. So here's my palette. As you see, it's an unusual sort of layout. All the colours along here, of course, are fairly recognisable. They're very similar to the colours I used on the acrylic stage. Some nice ochres. I've put out a touch of white and some Naples yellow for a light golden colour, but raw umber, burnt sienna, and in this case I used some Payne's grey. I couldn't find my tube of phthalo blue. It's somewhere in my box of paint. So I pulled out some Payne's grey because I want a grey colour. But look what I've done with my palette. You see the top section is plastic coated. If I can get the light to shine on that, you can see it's got a sort of a nice sort of plastic coating, which means the paint here will stay nice and wet. But I folded back the bottom of my palette to reveal the paper back. It's the paper part that I want to do the absorbing effect. I want this area to absorb the oil in my paint. Let's start a demonstration of this. I'm going to start by painting the top of my barn, and I've got one of these nice old well-worn brushes, and as we see on the reference photograph, and I'll bring this up here in this left hand side, the back side of our roof is obviously going to be in shadow. We want that to be fairly dark, maybe almost black, but I think I'm going to go for something like a raw umber colour. So watch this. I'm going to take just the smallest amount of raw umber paint and I'm going to put it down here. So I've taken it from the plastic coated part down onto the paper part here and just kind of swirl it down into sort of a shape like that. And the idea here is we just want to scrub this into the paper. Now the process of doing this dries the paint. You can see why I said use a brush which isn't too expensive, because you're actually going to be scrubbing the paint. Now this paint now has become almost completely dry. It's quite a quick transformation. So the paint that's on my brush is hardly wet at all. You see, barely leaves a trace on my finger. But if I take it up to my canvas, I can use this, just gently rub against the canvas and to deposit some paint. Now, the beauty of this is that you can use this almost as though you were shading with a pencil. You can create designs and patterns. You can press a little more gently. Sorry about that break in filming. My cameraman decided the keyboard was somewhere nice to walk. Any cat. Stay off that keyboard. So, as I was saying, take a little bit of paint, make sure it's almost completely dry. And I was just saying is that if you sit the brush on the canvas and press gently, you can do very fine, very sort of soft effects. But if you want to deepen a shadow, just sit the brush in one spot and work a little harder. And as you see, you can build up the depth of colour. It's particularly good for things like the shapes of bonnets and wings and things where you've got sort of these curves, is that you can use this to sort of shade and you can sort of blend things nicely. It's one of my favourite ways of painting sort of shapes and patterns like cars and wildlife. It works absolutely beautifully for doing things like fur. Now I think this might be like one of those old tin roofs, so I'm going to be putting on a few stripes, a few bars. Now is it dark enough? Well, if we have a look at the reference photograph, you can see it's a fair bit darker. So if I want to darken it, I fetch a little more paint down. I make sure I dry it. I can even blend in a little bit of Payne's grey. Don't forget, you're darkening this down all the time. See, darken it down. And let's put a little bit of that into there. I want to just increase the depth of colour. I think maybe a little stronger colour across the ridge. There, see how that worked? And then just work it down. And this building is a wonderful place to start because you can sit here and you can play. This is an old building, so it doesn't matter if you make little happy accents up here. No one's really going to be looking so hard at it. They're going to be looking more at the car. But as I say, this is just a fun technique and one I use a lot for doing things like wildlife. Now, the reason why I like it is because you can develop a painting at a nice, steady pace. Unlike some techniques, which is a bit of sort of one hit and you're done, with this particular style of painting, you can work slowly at a nice pace. Because it's almost dry, you can almost rest your hand on it without anything coming off. So this is a particularly nice style of painting, and one I think I encourage you to have a go at sometime. And I'm not going to bore you by watching me do this in real time because it's got to be a nice, gentle process. So I'm going to put on a little bit of time lapse. So as you see, I'm playing around with my old barn and just mucking about with my colours, kind of getting a feel for it. As I say, it's a great place to practice playing around with colours and seeing how things work. And things work better and things don't work out as expected. So the question you're probably dying to ask me is, how do you fix it if it all goes wrong? Well, I use water mixable oils with a baby wipe and one of these little cotton buds. Now, the baby wipes I use are the cheap and cheerful ones, not the ones with lots of lanolin in them and sort of skin softeners, just the cheap and cheerful basic baby wipes. And just squeeze that onto a cotton bud to dampen it slightly. And say, for instance, this here is too strong. With the slightly dampened cotton bud, you can simply run down your canvas and it just lifts off the paint. So it acts like a bit like a magic eraser, and you can simply go right back down to your canvas again. You can make changes to your painting, and you can even do this hours after you finished doing a certain section of painting. If you walk away from it, then come back and say, no, it didn't look right, I want to change it. It's an oil paint, it dries very slowly, and you can come back, let's say, even probably several hours later, and do a tidy up. For instance, there's some features on my painting I'm not particularly pleased about. I don't think they work particularly well, and I think maybe one or two of the sort of shapes and things I've created don't work out. Like, for instance, this particular dark piece here, like a big post. I don't think that looks quite right. So I might take my cotton bud, a little bit of the moisture from the baby wipe, and I might split that in two. Just rub the centre out. Maybe that looked like two boards instead of one big post. So you decide. You can play around with your paintings to your heart's content and decide what you like, what works, what doesn't work. Rub things out and just have a lot of fun with it. It's an incredibly fixable way of working, and sometimes it's nice to do what I'm doing here. Is if you've lost the boards, they don't look like boards anymore, they're just like random sorts of shapes, just to sort of take your cotton bud and just to sort of just run it through there and just kind of make the boards reappear by just kind of carving back down to the canvas. Isn't that neat? As I say, cotton bud, baby wipe, water mixable oils, and you're set. Word of caution though, this gets to be fun, and after a little while you can end up with, well, nothing. You just clean it all off. So, as I say, it's a fun technique, but you can get kind of carried away and take everything back off that you applied. So I'd say do a little, and you know what I'm going to say? Do a little, stand back, and then do a little bit more. But I'm going to just tidy up this little edge here because I quite like that little bright edge to my my front of my garage here. So I'm going to play around with this a little bit more and do a little bit more time lapse on it. Have a look at that shadow line there. Can you see that the light from over there, someone has put in a shadow line under there. So you can see that this is casting a shadow right the way across the corner of that building there. It's just a little bit grey, isn't it? And I don't have that on my painting, so what happens is my painting starts to look a little sort of flat. So I'm going to take just a little tiny bit of my Payne's grey colour here. And I'm just going to shadow in that area of my painting. And so you can be very gentle with this, because the paint that's on there, as I say, it's been dry brushed on, but if you work on it too hard, you can actually move it. But see what I'm doing is I'm just gently bringing in a shadow. I'm going to go very gently with this. By making a very definite line across there, you see how I've introduced a shadow. Okay, so we've managed to introduce a shadow, and if I want it to be a little bit more defined, if I just darken that edge of my eaves a tiny bit more. And for this, I'm drying my paint, but maybe not quite as vigorously, so that my colour is not quite as dry as it could be. I think what's happening here is I'm trying to get this dark edge to show up. There we go. So my paint is a little bit wetter, but that's okay. See, it gives me a nice dark underside, and I won't have to come back and touch this again. I think I need to darken this side of my roof a little more though, because it looks a little bit sort of under. And this is what you see when you stand back. I got to the other side of the studio and looked back at this building. I could see this side of the roof, although nice, it needed just a little bit more depth of colour. Just needs to be a little bit more kind of old and rusty looking. So I'm just going to strengthen that up a little bit. Do I need to do it to the whole roof? I don't think so. I think we can just get away with just doing just a little touch here, even just darkening that corner. That darkens that whole side of my roof out completely. There will be things called referred light, which is light bouncing around in the atmosphere. And I think you can see that with just a few subtleties, a few nice little touches here and there, I can come back and recreate this little building quite nicely. Tidy up some of those edges. There we go. See? So it's very easy to kind of play backwards and forwards with this. I'm going to take a break from my little building, and I think it's time I started work on the car. Looking at my car, I've got a choice of colours that I could go for here, and I've got two different blues. I've got cerulean blue and I've got some cobalt blue, and the labels are pretty good identifier. And as I mentioned, I've seen this car used numerous times on different places on the internet, and I've seen it in every shade of blue, including these shades, turquoise, you name it, I've seen it in different colours. So I think I might be using a bit of a combination of the two. See if I could blend some of the cobalt blue for maybe the darker shades, and then use a little bit of the cerulean blue for maybe the roof line, because I don't really want to use much white on this. It'll end up looking a bit sort of, well, pale and pastel-y, too pastel, I think. So let's put out a little bit of both colours and have a little play and see what we think. So there we are, cobalt and cerulean blue, and I've got a slightly smaller little angle brush here to work with. I'm probably going to play with the cerulean colour first. So I want this for the pale area on the top and the roof, and the cobalt colour more for the lower shadowy areas. Now, my background is a little bit shy of the edge of my car, not a problem, because I will be doing some touch-ups on the background in oils. So remember, the light comes from here, so the top and part of the car here is in the lighter blue shade. And I'm going to just lightly shade this, and I'm not going to be doing a ton of heavy colour here. And again, just a little bit of pale blue here. And I just want to really just block this in. Now, try and bear in mind the shape of the bonnet. It's got a nice curve to it, comes down. So your brushstroke wants to sort of mimic the shapes that you're painting a little bit. So if you do little curving strokes like that, and maybe work a little harder along this edge, you start to kind of create that nice sort of curve to the bonnet. Now, I will be adding a little white to some of this as well. But white reacts differently when you're shading with it. It doesn't quite work the same. It doesn't. You can't shade with white because white is white is white, and you can either be more white or less white. But there's no sort of like a lighter shade. If you shade with white, you can't make it look lighter, if that makes sense. Like with a dark colour, you can put it on gently, and you can go pale, and you can have a dark colour that fades to grey. With white, you put it on something and you try and shade with it, it just fades out. It doesn't get lighter than the colour it actually is, if that kind of makes sense. So I discovered this when trying to use it for shading in the past. But what you can do is you can just gently brush over the top of another colour, like this biscuit colour. You can add it on top, and you can lighten an area, but you can't put it over, say, white and make it look light. It doesn't work. So it's one of those weird things I discovered trying to dry brush with white. It doesn't want to work just the same. And I want a little bit of that pale blue colour around the top of the wheel arch. So I'm going to go for all the lightest shades of blue to start with. This is all done in... Now, there's a thing here. Maybe I should have done the grill with some white acrylic to look like silver, but I didn't. I'll live with it. Just a little, again, blend it down. It's a little bit stronger colour. And I want this for the shadow side. Again, these cars got a lovely curvaceous sort of round front on them, so I'll paint it with these lovely rounded strokes. And I want to get that nice kind of pattern. I might even leave a little shine of light there. So you see the process. I'm going to do a little bit of time lapse. I'm going to go back through my car. I'll put the reference photograph up in the corner for you so you can see where I'm working. And I'm looking at for the darkest darks, the lightest lights, and all the in-between tones. So let's put that blue colour into the rest of the car. my little car's progressing quite nicely, and I just put the grille on. And I always think with these sorts of cars that they really don't have a face until they have their grille in place. And as you see from, I'll bring the reference up here in the corner again, they've got a more sort of curved sort of thing to it. So I probably should have made these a little bit more kind of curved at the corners here a little bit more, but I can put some white over this and sort of get a little bit finer with some of the detail on here. But I want you to realise that, you know, with a dry brush, and I know it's stating the obvious, but with a dry brush that's a little bit wetter, you can make some super fine detail. You can really just get in and just use just the very, very edge of the brush just to rub in a little bit of fine detail here. And so just sit your brush in, give it a little wiggle, and you can add super fine detail to your painting. And again, I go backwards and forwards between my reference picture and here, and I'm looking for all those shadows. And I can see this wing here needs to be a lot darker. You see, it's just a bit too pale. This wing I'm not too pleased with. I know the colours aren't exactly right, but I don't really care too much. But this wing here does need to be a wee bit dark. In fact, probably the whole side of this car could do with darkening up. And again, look at that light, how it falls across literally one corner of the car, that whole corner there, and everything from here is graduations of shade and shadow. The tip of the bonnet there with a little bit of dark on it. So again, pay attention to this when you're doing your paintings. If you're going to make it look three-dimensional, you have to observe shadows. Where do the shadows fall? Where's the light source? And reproduce that. I just noticed on the top of the bonnet there, you see a lovely sort of turquoisey colour there. Again, that's the shadow line. Just like I did with the building up here, I put a shadow line into it and got it into 3D. So I need to think about this being more 3D as well. So if I bring the reference picture up here to the side, you can see that we've made, again, another big step forward with it. We still have to sort out a couple more details on the car. We've done so far all the mid-tones, in other words, all the middle tones from sort of light blues to dark blues, and we've started including now all some of the shadow tones as well, but we're still missing the other end of the spectrum, the very light tones. And if you look on the roof there, you'll see there's a really bright patch there. There's a bright patch on the bonnet. There's a little bright patch around the edge of that wing. And did you notice the little bright line around the edge of the wing on the other side there? This is referred light. In other words, light bouncing back, maybe from bushes or the ground here, shining back. And we have to do something with those little headlights, of course. And the more you look, the more things you need to look at. You need to look at the grille, you need to put the trims. You could spend hours and hours and hours on this little car. I'm going to do a little bit more detailing on the headlights next, and for that I've got my little brush back, and looking at the reference picture, one of them looks pretty much just a grey sort of shape. So I'm just going to grey this down, knock out that brightness, because that's, again, it's on the shadow side of the car. And I think the darkest shadows are going to be probably in the bottom right, just through there. Okay, so the furthest side from the light, so that's that bottom right side. This even looks a little bit brown, like it's got some rust on it. But again, I'm going to do the same little trick. Hit that bottom right corner. Okay, so kind of it gives the kind of the light a bit of some depth. And I think I'm going to put on just the smallest amount of maybe a little brown rust here and there, just a little touch of rust in that light. Be careful because obviously you're putting some brown colours with some blue greys, and browns and blues make green. So you've got to be a little careful when you do this, and if you're going to be adding in, I might even put a little bit of rust in here and there. Why not? There's a number plate there. I forgot the number plate earlier on, so let's put a little bit of rust here and there just to kind of warm things up just a touch. Yeah, I forgot the number plate and I cleaned off a spot for it, and now I'm filling it back in again, aren't I? So, oh well. So yeah, a bit of verdigris, a bit of rust. See, it doesn't take much, just a few little touches of colour can really make a big difference. Okay, now I need a clean brush because these ones are both dirty. So I didn't mention washing brushes before, but all I've got here is just a pot of water with a few drops of dish soap in it, and you just put your brush in the corner, give it a good twirl, get all the paint out. But here's the thing, before you can use that brush again, it must be absolutely bone dry. Remember, we're using water mixable oils, and if you put water with them, they turn to like an oily watercolour, not very pleasant to work with. And of course you can't do anything like dry brushing, so take a few moments to really dry your brush. Okay, so we've kind of toned down those lights. Now for those lightest lights, the brightest lights, and for this I'm finally going to get into some of the white. Now remember what I was saying earlier on about not being able to shade with white? It's actually very hard to shade with white, and I'm going to prove it to you. If I want to add some brightness to my sky, and I put some on here, so I'm going to lighten this patch up. Okay, so you see I've managed to increase the brightness, but I can't shade it. I can't shade it and change it. All I can do is just disperse it. So this is the challenge we find ourselves in, whereas with greys we can build them up. I can't build this up any darker than that, because only brighter than that, because white is white. So it doesn't matter how hard I work, that's the brightest it's ever going to be. Whereas darks, I can go from lights through to much darker. So I hope you kind of get what I'm trying to do here, is that it's actually hard to shade with white because it isn't a shade. Okay, so I'm stuck in a cough suite. While I'm having trouble talking. Getting a little bit of that white. Can't even see it on my palette, can you? So, as I say, I just want to put in just the indication of a little brightness around the arch. And you want to just literally put a little lick of this on the painting. Don't go mad with it. Just put a little lick. Something like that. There we go. I think there's a nice lightness across the bonnet, up to that sort of central divide. That's a little bright. That's a little too bright, but that's okay. I'll live with it. Just kind of give it a little flick. This corner's a little brighter. There's a little zing of light on the chrome, on the bumper. And you'll notice that most of these little touches of light are literally just that one single stroke. I'm going to say it's not easy to use white to shade with. So I'm just putting a little bit of light on that left side of the grill. And not all of them get it. Some of them will get it. Some of them won't. In fact, some of these grills, some of these little bars look like they're slightly bent. And I hope you're sort of seeing here that's that little referred light there. I think I'll just smooth that out with my finger. You see, by adding these little touches of light, your car becomes more and more 3D. So you're not going to get a number plate, but you put the number plate in on your car. That's the trick. You put in, if you've got a maybe a favourite number plate, maybe one of your first cars, you might want to personalise. I'm not saying you had a car this age, but if you want to personalise your car, then hey, why not? I think that's kind of fun. So you see, lots of little touches here, lots of little things you can do to enhance the car, more detail. But I do want to move on now to working on my sky, working on this background hill, and maybe a few more little touches here and there in my painting. Time to turn my attention to the sky, and I'll bring my reference picture up here again in the corner. But as you can see, that there's a big mass of dark cloud across the top, and there's this sort of orangey sort of underside to it. But also notice that across the hills there, you can see there's like a path of light. The light is just breaking over the edge of this hillside here. Remember, this has all been done in acrylic, so this is nice and dry. And I can blend colour into here and then just drag some light beams across down this hillside. But there is an orangey blush to this. And whenever I'm looking to create a nice orange colour, I usually go for a red and a yellow, cad red medium and cad yellow deep hue. You don't want anything which is sort of not a transparent yellow. So anything like an ochre, which has got a lot of white in it, won't make a very nice orangey colour. It tends to sort of get it kind of a bit sort of mushy. We want quite a transparent orange colour, and so I pick a bright red and a bright yellow colour. Tend to work best. Whoops, and I just dropped that tube of paint. Note to self, don't tread on it. You know I'm going to tread on it, don't you? Okay, so I put a little bit of paper towel under my paint just to sort of suck up some of the oil. I think I might actually have to go and mix up over here. Now, I washed my brushes last night before I stopped painting, and they sat and air dried through the night. So let's knock off some of that. That oil's very wet. It may not make so much difference to my painting today, but because I'm blending over the top of the acrylics. But now I don't know where I'm mixing my paint up. Don't you just hate that? I'm looking for a lovely warm orangey colour. Say this blush colour is sort of up under the cloud, and I'm not going to go too low with this. I still want some sky showing, but I'm just mapping out where I want this to be, and I'm not going to get overly fussy with this. I really I want the car to be the main feature, not spend too much time here. That's kind of that mapped out where it's going to be in my painting. Again, I'm just dry brushing this. If I don't like it, I can pick up a baby wipe and it can all go away. So this is, once again, it's a very, very nice way of painting, that it's not so permanent you can't come back and have a little play with it. So I'm being generous with the amount of highlighting I'm putting on there, and that's pretty much a general rule when you're painting, that when you're working with lights and darks, the darks will overtake the light colours. That's a little bit of red through. That's pretty, isn't it? That the dark colours will bully all the light colours out the way. So put on a few more of the light colours, because once you lose them and the dark gets in there, it's much harder to get this all back. Okay, so that's just a general rule that I stick to. Overdo it on the highlighting and then cut it back with the shadows. So I'm gonna carry on using that brush. I'm gonna go straight into some white and dry it out. What sort of colour does that give me? Kind of a fleshy pink colour. To work with the yellow tones more than I can work with the red tones. And again, I'm thinking about this kind of this light pattern here. Let's just, again, just a light testing of the colours here. Let's have a little look at that and see if I like it. Kind of looking like this. What do I think? I'm not sure I like it. It looks a little kind of flesh coloured to me. I'm going to get rid of that colour. That's the flesh colour I got there, which is a little bit too pink. Obviously remember that your white is a totally opaque colour. That's a slightly more orangey tone. I think it's a little nicer for what I want. I thought this might well be a little more challenging. Again, it's kind of a little bit of experience coming through here that sometimes when you're trying to get these effects to work, as soon as you start adding white into the mixture, you kind of get a foggy effect, which isn't always kind of what you want. This is now a more transparent colour that I'm kind of pushing into my canvas. Some reds. But of course, if you're doing this painting, you use the colour blends and mixtures that you like for your own painting. What I'm doing here is I'm just putting that reddish colour on the horizon here. I want to lose the horizon line a little bit. Bring some of that red colour into here. I'm going to do a little bit of time lapse through this section so you can see me playing backwards and forwards with my colour, and I'm going to take some of this colour and let it kind of burn up into the sky as well. So we had a lot of fun in that section there, just playing around with this light on the horizon. I settled for this nice sort of orange glow in the end. I quite like that. And I used my brush laid flat. Did you see I kind of drag it? If you go in on edge sometimes, I put a few rays of light in there, which is okay, but more often light spills over. It's almost like water rolling down. It doesn't come down in sort of in beams quite so often. It often just rolls across like almost like a mist. So I kind of laid my brush flat and just dragged it across. And because this is a little textured, it kind of hit some of the little high spots in the acrylic, and it leaves this nice sort of patterning across the surface here. And trust me, you could spend a day just doing this bit, piddling around, go backwards and forwards. And I played around. Let me just drop my camera a tiny bit. And I put a little bit of light here on the foreground. I reduced the exposure on my camera setting here because I'm going to do the sky, and it was over bright. So down in here I put some little sunny bits of light down in here. And again, how long could you spend on this? Oh gosh, I could probably spend another 2 or 3 days just massaging this whole painting around. But that won't get it done for Sunday, so let me get back to my sky. Whoopsie. Okay. Strange. It's a strange colour. Looks like purples and browns and all manner of things up there, doesn't it? Not a terribly... Again, I don't think I've ever seen a sky that colour. It's another reason to think that this is probably had... If it was a photograph, it was taken with a filter. So you kind of sometimes just have to sort of suspend your disbelief of something. If it works photographically, then why not as a painting? So I'm just going to put some nice browns. I got this raw umber colour, and I'm going to put some of that through there now. I'm applying this. Because I've got a big area to cover, I don't really particularly need to dry this out. I'm going to take colour straight from my palette. This palette has sat out overnight, and the paint has already started to skin a little. So I don't have to dry this. I'm going to just work it straight into my canvas. The Chameleon can change its colours. This colour, Payne's Grey, can mix with practically every other colour, bar yellow, which obviously it turns green, but you can mix it with browns and with oranges and with blues and greens, and it'll change the tone of the paint, and it blends beautifully. So you can darken down a colour by just using a touch of Payne's Grey into any kind of a brown tone, and you end up with a whole new shade of brown. And it's a more friendly colour than black. Black tends to just block everything. Whereas Payne's Grey, as I say, it has a sort of a slightly purplish tone to it. Perfect for this sky. And it's a mixer. It likes to mix with other colours. The chameleon colour, as I call it. It'll change other colours into other colours. Let's get to my feet. Hey. I didn't tread on it. Bonus. I played around with my background here a little more. I was hunting through my paint, desperately searching for this colour, cad yellow, pale hue. I couldn't find it. And it's the colour I wanted to put in these rays of light. I used Naples yellow, was a little bit too soft, but that cad yellow, little tiny drop of white through it, makes these amazing bright colours here. And I want a little touch of this for my car, and just going to freehand on these final little licks of highlight. Just imagine where the rays of light would hit my little car. Just touch a little lick of light around here. Again, this paint being dry brushed, the canvas is almost completely dry to the touch, and you just need these little tiny little sparklers. So I'm just using the little point of my brush here just to put these in, and they are the smallest touches of paint, but they can sometimes be the ones that really make your painting really jump. That's a little delicate touch there, isn't it? Little tiny sparkle on that. Maybe a little catch on the end of this bumper. But don't overdo it. maybe the light catch on this edge. Look at that. See how that really makes my little painting jump. And these are the moments you look for in your painting, that kind of the last moment, zings of light that really make your painting jump. But take your time with it again, sit back, look, just a little tiny zing of light here, a little tiny touch of light there. These look a little pointy. Maybe I'll just kind of smooth them down a touch. So I'm going to call it quits with my painting. I love it. I love the atmosphere of it. I love the whole sort of old feel to it. I turned my background lighting off so you could just see the painting without any kind of other lights around it. But I could play around with the foreground a little bit more as well. But I think overall I'm really pleased with that. So there you have it, my finished painting. Well, I say finished. A painting's never really ever finished. A wise person said that they're never finished, merely abandoned. And I think I've got as far as I can get with this before I have to stop and make a lovely video for you to watch. Thank you to the lovely subscriber who sent this photograph me to try, and I'm really pleased with the overall effect. It has that nice sort of old-fashioned sort of feel to it, like a sort of a litho print or one of those sorts of paintings. I think the effect has been rather lovely. And can I do more with this? Absolutely. I could probably spend at least another week or so on this. But if you've enjoyed this painting, don't move, because there's some more lovely videos for you to watch coming right along. In the meantime, happy painting, people. Ooh, and don't forget, if you like this, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and of course leave a comment down below. See you soon.